Welcome everyone to the Director Identification Number webinar. Today's informative. It's going to be about the process and why it's required. Today is not going to be a lengthy webinar. However, some practical tips on what is required, how to get it done, and why we need to get it done. So unfortunately, it's a new regime that the Australian government has placed on directors. We've had a few inquiries prior to today, whether this is a hoax or whether it's required if I have a trustee company. So we're going to cover those issues today. And just before we get into the webinar and the detail, just a little bit about us. So I'm Michael Risoli, CEO and Director of MKS Group. MKS Group, we're accountants in Moonee Ponds, cloud-based specialists that have been around for a number of years. My business partner, Mark Sade, he's also the founding director and on today as well. He'll be in the background in case we have any other questions or comments. And just on that, what we'll also say is that there should be a chat function at the bottom of the screen or at the top. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. In terms of if that is not working for you at the moment, please email hello@mksgroup.com.au and we can answer your questions offline, but we'll hopefully get to all the questions or answer your questions throughout this session today. So we are Xero Platinum Partners. We are chartered accountants and we definitely love small businesses and we love working with them and guiding them through any of the issues that they have from an accounting and tax perspective, and also through their bookkeeping or payroll requirements or budgeting and cash flow. We're more than just numbers, and hence why we're doing this session today to help provide some value add to our clients. And for those that aren't clients, helping you to navigate through these changes. So we're going to dive straight in. We're not going to fluff around today. I know time is valuable for everyone, and I do appreciate you all joining in today. So director identification numbers, or director IDs, or DIN. What I would like to say on the outset is that it's similar to a tax file number. It is required for all existing and potentially new directors going forward. And it's going to be a number that's with you for life, and it will be shared with the Australian Securities Investment Commission, or ASIC as it's commonly called or known. And it is a new legislation that was introduced last year about November. Some of the reasons why this has been introduced is to prevent directors of existing companies to prevent fraudulent activity. Some of those fraudulent activities could be in phoenixing activity, where businesses are operating under one entity and then they also rack up a lot of debt, create a new company, start again, and leave behind the remnants of a insolvent business. That's one of the reasons. Another reason that this is coming to play is that ASIC has also suggested there's a number of duplicate director names in the system, which are actually the one or the same person. So for example, we might have directors that have their maiden name listed as as a director for one company, and on another company, they may have their married name. So this is specifically around business owners and directors that have multiple companies. Some of them might even include, by error, inadvertently, that might have a place of birth noted on one company versus a different place of birth for another. So ASIC feels that once this has gone through, once all the directors, existing directors, have this director identification, we'll be able to identify these discrepancies quite easily and rectify them later on and remove the duplicates. Obviously, if you are not a director currently and you will be a director in the future, this will help simplify the process going forward when and if you become a director in the future. So what is a director identification number? It is just a simple 15-digit identifier. It's a pretty long identifier. It's a number that will help you be verified and identified with the Australian Business Registry Services, which is the body that will manage this process and communicate between ASIC and the ATO. So moving along, we're going to go through, like I said, we're going to be pretty quick fire, and if there's any comments or questions, please put them in the chat. And if that's not currently available to you, please email hello@mksgroup.com.au. So who needs it? Well, anyone who is a director of a company, which is quite obvious, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Corporation, even if you are solely a director of a corporate trustee, which is very common in Australia, where an entity such as a trust has a company acting as a trustee. Or you might have a company as a trustee for a self-managed super fund. This is far-reaching, and it's wide. It relates to any director in any capacity, whether it is a business and it's trading, or whether it's just a simply investment vehicle, such as a investment trust or a self-managed super fund. Importantly, I think the biggest challenge that we're going to have are those foreign companies that are registered with ASIC and the directors are not located here in Australia. Unfortunately, those directors of foreign companies will be required to register for a director identification number as well. I might just go back for one step and just make a note here about a title, a job title that someone might have versus the actual responsibility as a company director. There are many job titles now that include the name or the term director. For example, you've got a creative director for an advertising agency or a marketing company. If that person is not acting as a director under the Corporations Act, and it's purely just a term or a use of a terminology to describe that person's role, then they're not required to get a director identification number. And that has become quite common in the last few years. However, if that person actually has the role as a director under the corporations law for that business or for that company, then they will be required to get a director identification number. Pardon me, we skipped way too ahead. Okay, so there's some important dates that everyone needs to be aware of in relation to director identification numbers. So existing directors. So they've been a director for a number of years or a period of time before October 2021. There is plenty of time for you to get a director identification number. You've got to the 30th of November 2022. Yes, that is well down the track, but fast forward, we're entering April next, as of tomorrow. So we're already 3 months down the track. That 30 November 2022 deadline will fast approach. So our advice and our tip to you is to ensure that you get onto this as soon as possible. Then we have the second category, which is existing and new directors. So between the 1st of November 21 and the 4th of April 22. So if you become a director in that period of time, or you will need to apply for a director identification number within 28 days of being appointed as a director. So let me just say that again. If you are a director or appointed a director title with a company between the 1st of November 21 and the 4th of April 22, you will need to be appointed or issued a director identification number within 28 days of that appointment. That is a requirement under the legislation. There are penalties being imposed. However, our view is that because this is quite a new concept, there will be some leniency. However, our advice to you is, if you haven't already got one and a director identification number and you've been appointed as a director of a company, we strongly advise you to get onto that ASAP. And then what happens after the 5th of April? So this is going forward after the 5th of April, which is only next week. You will need a director identification number before being appointed as a director. So that is a different shift. That is a new concept completely, whereby a lot of times we get clients come to us and say, I need a new entity. I've started a new business. I need to, I'm going to be the director, or myself or my spouse or my business partner is going to be the directors. Go ahead, this is the name, set it up for us, please. And this could also apply very easily for corporate trustees for a self-managed super fund or an investment company or a unit trust. Sorry, investment trust or unit trust. Going forward from next week, you won't be able to appoint anyone or yourself as a director until you have a director identification number. So that's going to be a shift going forward, and that's going to be the new normal prior to setting up a new business structure. Okay, so there's a couple of fundamental things that we need to go through today and how to actually get there. But before we actually apply for a director identification number, and I'll be honest, it's not a very onerous process, but the process prior to actually applying is, this is what we call sort of step one. And that would mean you need a MyGov ID. So it's not a MyGov account. This is different. This is a MyGov ID. This is a digital identity that connects you to the Australian government and allows you to be able to identify yourself with the government. Now, a lot of accountants already have a MyGov ID. Unfortunately, that is a personal ID. That is an ID attached to that individual. So if you're thinking, well, I'll just get my accountant to do my director identification number. Well, no, we can't. Unfortunately, every director will need their own MyGov ID. And again, just to reiterate, it is quite different to a MyGov account. So MyGov accounts are typically associated with your personal relations with the Australian Taxation Office, Centrelink, Medicare, and much more. MyGov ID is about identifying who that person is in a business that can work or identify themselves when dealing online with the Australian government. And it is an app that you can download through the Apple or the Google Play stores. And we'll show you just going forward. Oops. There are slight differences. So if you do a search in your browsers online, you'll notice there's two distinct differences here between what a MyGov ID looks like, or the website and the imagery, versus MyGov. The MyGov ID is a bit of a darker green. I know I'm being very simple and basic, but you must notice the difference. When you are setting up your MyGov ID, you need to understand that this is the one that we need, or you will need to register with prior to applying for a director identification number. And this is the process that you must complete individually, or a director must complete individually. The MyGov account looks slightly different. As you can see on the right-hand side there, it's a lighter green. It doesn't have the ID terminology in the name. And again, this is how most people have a connection with the tax office or with Medicare, but that is personal. It's not business related. Okay, setting up MyGov ID. Now, as I said, you need to download an app on a smartphone, whether it's through Apple iTunes or whether it's the Google Play Store if you're on Android devices. Our tip prior to you jumping ahead and downloading the app is to get your documents in order, because you will need to demonstrate and upload documents to set up your MyGov ID. You can't proceed to apply for a director ID without the MyGov ID account. So it's really important. So the sort of documents that you will need to set up a MyGov ID account, very common documents that we all know. It'll be a birth certificate, Medicare card, driver's license or a learner's permit, passport, but the passport can't be more than 3 years expired. So hopefully it's still valid. And I know that over the last few years, not many people have traveled. So that's a thing to watch out for when you are applying. And if you're potentially going to use a passport as your identification document to set up your MyGov ID account. Some people have recently dug up their passport and realized that it's expired. So you'll need to make sure you've got the other documentation in place. The identity strength is something that is within the app itself, and you will need just a standard at a minimum to apply. So that's that 2 documents. And in the past, you might have thought of it as a 100-point ID check, very similar process to that. Naturally, you're going to need your full name, date of birth, and email address, and to be able to set up your MyGov ID. Okay, so now we're going to look at a few little steps beforehand. As I said, the tip for us is to prepare your documentation, have it ready before doing both the MyGov ID and the director identification application. And the director identification application will need another set of different documents or identifiers. As you can see on the left, as we already spoke about, you'll also need your tax file number, your residential address, as recorded with the Australian Taxation Office. Okay. On the director identification application, there will be further identifiers or documents that you will need to provide that confirms with the ATO they are dealing with you. And that would be what bank account you hold or is recorded with the Australian Taxation Office. You will need the reference number potentially from your notice of assessment. And you only need to answer 2 of these questions, not all of them. So the most important would be, or the most common that we find that most directors would use would be bank account and the notice of assessment details. And that's the notice that you receive after you've lodged your tax return. You'll get a notice, and that notice can be any of the last few years that's been submitted or from your tax return. Other details, if you don't have them available to you, superannuation account details, dividend details. So if you hold, personally, if you hold any shares listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, you might need to provide some details there that helps you identify yourself. If you're on Centrelink benefits, you'll need the payment summary, pardon me, or a PAYG payment summary document. Okay, so how to, step 3. So you need to complete your application. So once you've got your MyGov ID, and it's with a standard or strong identity strength, you'll then need to take the next step, and this is part of the director identification number application. So this is with the Australian Business Register Services, and there's the link here as to where you could find that. I'm going to show you now the website, what the website will look like. So again, it's not the tax office, it's not ASIC, it's a different body that manages this process for you. And if you type in that, if you type in this link here, or even if you just search register for a director identification number, this is the page that you need to look for. Okay, and then you can start the process from here. So what we're going to try and do now is show you what the application actually looks like. So this is actually screenshots of the process, of the application process. We're in step 1 of the director identification application, and there's some documents or some tick boxes along the line. Obviously, they just acknowledge that you're eligible to be someone to apply, and that you also meet the requirements as to be a director. Naturally, the most important thing is got to be a natural person, and you must be over 18 or at least 18 years of age or over. So once you've ticked those, read through the page, tick those boxes, you can click next, and then it will ask you for your personal details. So I've just got a screenshot of my application that I've done. So here I've got my name. Obviously, my date of birth has been blacked out. No one wants to know how young I am. And then the important one here is I have been previously known as another name. This could be where some people might have difficulty progressing or potentially encounter some difficulties, particularly whereby, as I said earlier in this webinar, if you were known as a former name, like a married name or a maiden name, potentially you might have spelling mistakes. And this has occurred in the past where a client has come to us and the director's name was misspelt, and we've had to correct that with ASIC. That's another issue that could potentially be. Some people abbreviate, and this is common where they have a native language as their first name. However, they refer to themselves as an Anglo-Saxon name. And I'll give an example of myself. In Italian, my name is Michele. However, all my documentation is Michael. Now, if I had registered as a director previously under Michele, this is where an issue might be the problem. Or it could be as simple as Mike versus Michael. So you just need to be wary of that. However, I don't feel like many people are going to have too much of a problem with this. If you do, just obviously reach out to us and we'll be able to help you. Then this is where you'll need to complete your place of birth. And as I said earlier, for people who have multiple directorships or directors of multiple companies, this is another area we see that are different. For example, you know, someone might have put down that their place of birth is Melbourne when they first registered as a director for a company. Then they've opened up a subsequent company later down the track for a new business activity, and they might have registered their town of birth as Carlton, for example. This is where it might cause a bit of an issue. Now, another thing, just to go back a step on the previously known name, middle names is also an issue as well, or a potential issue. So you might have Michael Jones Risoli. I know that's a very odd name, but Michael Jones Risoli on one directorship versus Michael Risoli on a second directorship. And that's just to be mindful of those issues when you're going through the application process. However, if you've navigated through this screen, okay, you can then click next. And before I do go to the next slide, I just want to point out that if we get to the process and you do get your director identification number, and we do identify subsequently that there are differences, we can adjust and amend that with ASIC, but not at this. We can't amend it at this process. It's a separate process that is done through ASIC directly. So moving along, all we're going to do now is put in your address, and you can search, or you can just type in the address, your contact numbers, your email address, and that gets will get verified on the back end. Quite a simple process. Once you've gone through that, you click next, and basically it will ask you to review all your details. And then voila, here we go. You get your director identification number. That director identification on screen at the moment is a fictitious one. Obviously, it's just been blanked out for the actual one. It is an important number. I would encourage everyone to keep it secure, but also it definitely will be part of a public record when it's registered with ASIC. So congratulations, you've gone through the process. As I said, today is not going to be a really long webinar. It's not a really long process. There is just the steps that you need to know and be clear on before you go there. So what do? Yeah, you've got a director ID. Fantastic. Well, you could provide that to company secretary, which most cases, in most small businesses or most private enterprise, that secretary or other director or contact person within an organization would be one and the same. The other way, or the other thing we do obviously encourage, and as accountants we will ask you for, is to provide it to your accountant. So we can align that with all companies that you are a director with, and we can then help you identify if there's any problems or issues with different names, different spellings, different addresses or places of birth. And really, that's it. So in terms of in questions, today, like I said, is going to be quick fire. It's about just identifying some of the issues that we've already encountered and some clients have encountered, and just to clarify that, show you the process and advise you on what documents that's needed. However, feel free to reach out to us, hello@mksgroup.com.au, or on our number 9374 8400 and 03 obviously for Victoria. Reach out for us. One of the questions in the chat that I do have here is, how do we go about correcting mistakes? There is specific forms with ASIC that once you get your director identification number, and I'm assuming this person has maybe multiple directorships. However, if you do have changes we do need to make, there is a specific form that we need to lodge with ASIC. It won't be, as I said earlier, it's not part of the process of applying for a director identification number. And that could even be for a single director entity or a director who's only a director of one entity, and there is an error or a mistake. Maybe even it could be just an old residential address that can be corrected, and we can help you through that process. So just reach out to us and we'll be able to talk you through that and help you fix it. But I'd like to say thank you for everyone for taking some time out in your day to joining us. www.mksgroup.com.au is our email address. We do have some upcoming events coming along. In fact, we do have one coming up in the next 2 days. We'll be exhibiting at the Melbourne Franchise and Business Opportunities Expo. If you do want a free ticket, please reach out to us and we'll be able to organise one for you. That will save you $20 per person that's attending. Coming up also, we do have online and we also have face-to-face Xero training. So as Xero Platinum Partners, part of our aim is to help our client community and community at large to learn and use Xero to the best of its ability. If you head to our website, mksgroup.com.au, just look under events or Xero training, and you'll be able to find the links there to be able to register. But again, thank you for attending today. Appreciate your time. It's very valuable, but I'm going to give you back a few more minutes and we'll see you next time. Take care.